Hey friends, family, followers, and subscribers. It's me again, your fellow Winchester brother and your fellow man of letters, Bradford Schiebel, here to do another book review. Yay! We love book reviews. So in my break between making TBRs and rooting for the Bulldogs, who did not have another successful season, as typical, if you're a Bulldogs fan at this point, you're just used to being disappointed. So, but it's fine. We still love our dogs, and we always will. But today I'm doing a book review on what I think will become a classic, and that is the fourth Red Rising book, Iron Gold. This book definitely changed my opinions on a lot of sci-fi writing, because while the first three Red Rising books were they were good, they were above average. They had a lot of potential. As I've said earlier in my Morningstar review, if you want to check it out, see here. Brown has a very distinct writing style. He writes in first person, present tense prose, and he doesn't go into a lot of detail of the surroundings of the characters. The books are extremely fast paced, which is fine. I like a story with a little bit more history of the world. That makes sense. And you don't get a ton of that still in this book, but what you do get are characters who have grown. You get political systems that have changed, that are more nuanced, that are more layered, complex, and you get really complex human dynamics. That's one of the reasons why this has been my favorite book of the Red Rising series thus far. And so that being said, I'm going to be going into a few characters that I've really enjoyed, but also some of the points of the book that also just really stuck out to me, and why this is my favorite book in the Red Rising series so far. So that being said, let's get started. First off, we're going to start with our protagonist, Darrow of Lekos. I think that's how you say it. He has been what's known as the Arch Imperator of the New Solar Republic for 10 years now. There's a 10-year time jump between Morningstar and Iron Gold. And so where that leaves Darrow is he's been at war for now over a decade. And what's different between him in the original trilogy and him in this book is that he is war-torn, he's beat down, he's not as much of an idealist anymore. He's finding his values completely challenged and changed in some really fascinating ways. He's having to reconcile with not living in a tyrannical authoritarian society anymore. He's living within a democracy. And that is complicated when his wife is the leader of that democracy, the sovereign, Virginia Augustus, aka Mustang. And she is facing opposition left and right. She is trying to lead a republic. She's trying to give power to the people who've been oppressed for centuries. The reds, the obsidians, the blues, the golds, the greens, pretty much all the colors except for gold have been oppressed. And she has made a republic where those caste levels don't matter as much anymore. But in the process, she's taken away a lot of the power given to her seat of authority. She can't really control a lot of other positions that people in her society take on. And so that complicates things a lot. I'm not going to get into spoilers, but early on in the book, there's a scene between them that is just gutting, but it sets the stakes of the novel so well. Now, the next character I'm going to talk about is Lysander Al Lune, the grandson of the previous sovereign. Now, Lysander is a gold. He's got a much more idealistic view of the world than his grandmother did. His grandmother was an awful person. She was sadistic, she was a sadist. She would only do things that benefited her agenda and benefited her top level of society. Lysander, on the other hand, realizes that his grandmother was a terrible person, but he misses her, he grieves her, Lysander is in self-imposed exile with Darrow's former archenemy, now turned friend, now turned anti-hero, Cassius Al Bellona, and they are traveling through the solar system together. The journey they go on together is probably my favorite in this book, out of any of the characters that you get, because you see Cassius on a redemption arc. You see him struggling with the mistakes that he's made throughout his life. You see Cassius wanting to stop playing the games and plots of war in this world. And Lysander is kind of playing a backseat. He's kind of a mentee to Cassius. However, he also has plans of his own. And those really begin to get fleshed out as their story progresses throughout the book. And there are some tragic events that happen to Cassius and Lysander. And those events drastically shape how the next few books in this trilogy will play out. And why I say they're my favorite is because I loved Cassius's arc, not only in this book, but in the 3 books before this, because he was conflicted. And I think that really shows in this book, because you get more into his headspace. You don't get a perspective arc from Cassius in this book, but you do get one from Lysander. And Lysander explains their dynamics very well. And then next, I want to go into Ephraim T. Horn's arc. Ephraim is interesting. Where Cassius was an anti-hero, Ephraim is even more so an anti-hero. He wants to rebel against everything. He's bitter because he lost his husband in Morningstar, Trig T. Nakamura, I think his name was, when Victra Alseverus Julii was attempting to break Darrow out of prison. And so where Ephraim is in his journey is he wants to get revenge on the Republic. He wants to get revenge on Mustang. He wants to make the Golds hurt in as many places as possible because he doesn't think the Republic has done its job well. And so he signs up for a mission and gets his path crossed with a few other interesting characters along the way. And through the course of this mission, the depth of his brokenness and his humanity really comes out. And that leads to some interesting cliffhangers at the end of the book that I will leave unnamed, because his arc is interesting. His arc is complex. While I did have a hard time following him out of the 4 main characters who had perspectives in this book, I still did enjoy it because he was unpredictable. And he did have some run-ins with some familiar faces that will remain nameless. And also, he just has some really kick-ass moments. Lyria of Lagalos, I think her name was the 4th person in this novel to have a point of view arc. And while hers was interesting and highlighted some of the challenges the new Solar Republic is facing, she just didn't jive with me as much. While she was interesting, I wasn't as compelled by her arc or as gripped by her arc as I was by Darrow's arc or Cassius and Lysander's arc. And so that's why my character score goes down to about a 7.5. And so where Iron Gold has taken the Red Rising series in a different direction is, like I was saying earlier, it has multiple perspectives from multiple characters instead of from just Darrow's perspective. I really enjoy that in novels because it adds depth to the world you are being immersed in. For example, Lysander is reflecting on what it was like to be raised as a Gold. Darrow is reflecting on his past. He's reflecting on being raised as a Red in the caves and the caverns of Mars, but is now the husband of the most powerful woman in the solar system. And so he's wrestling with his responsibility as basically the general of the Republic's armies, while his wife is literally in charge of everything. And that restricts him in a lot of different ways. Because of his loyalties, he wants to do the right thing. He's very much driven by his heart. He's very much driven by what's right and what's wrong, regardless of whether or not that's against the rules. Lysander, on the other hand, he's driven by grief. He's driven by longing. He's driven by idealism. And where that takes him is a very deep place at the end of the novel. And it leads him to a place a lot of people would see coming, but also wouldn't see coming. And so that part of the novel, I would give just a 10 out of 10. Easy. The whole Lysander arc is just fabulous. And I also love a good complex character. Severus Snape, where you at? I do have a couple of complaints about how certain events are handled. Some things are handled off screen and not given a lot of detail, and so it kind of leaves an interesting taste in your mouth, but in the end it adds more stakes to the story, and that's what makes this story great. And also, another thing I really enjoyed about this book was Brown's writing style. It is evolved and matured leaps and bounds from where it was in the first 3 books. And what I mean by that is he's now writing scenes in action with a lot more subtlety. He doesn't just straight up say something is happening. He gives hints as he's building it up, but also while you're watching something unfold. I'm a huge fan of that in literature. I just finished reading the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson about 2 or 3 months ago. And one thing I really enjoyed about Jordan's writing style is he never gives you things directly. He builds them up very subtly, and a lot of times you miss what's happening until he just flat out says it. And a lot of the moments in the Wheel of Time are like that. I like subtle literature because it gets you thinking. It gets you immersed in the world. And that's what I love about stories like this, is they get you immersed in the world. Regardless of how well it's executed, that's another story. But Brown's writing style and his prose have matured so much by the time you get to this book. The prose is mature, it's complex, it's subtle, it's still fast-paced, even though it is a little slower than the first 3 books. And that I will give a 9.5 out of 10 because he is still growing very much as an author. He's still a young author. Just like myself, I can relate to that. As to the characters, I give all of the characters across the book just a straight 7.5 out of 10. One character in particular I didn't really enjoy as much, even though I did mention him earlier, was Ephraim. However, that doesn't mean he wasn't an interesting character. I just didn't enjoy him as much personally. The last thing I'm gonna say is the pacing of this book was great. It was a little slow at first, and then it slowly built and built and built and got faster and faster and faster until the end is just an all-out cliffhanger. You don't see it coming. It's subversive, and for that I give a 10 out of 10. And I love that about these books. Brown holds no punches. It's tragic. It's adult fiction disguised as young adult science fiction, which is brilliant. And so his pacing, I will give a 9.5 out of 10. His prose, I give an 8.5 out of 10. Now where that adds up is this book gets a solid 8.5 out of 10 for me. Still my personal favorite for this series. I'm a little bit harsher when it comes to critically reviewing a book because I like to see how authors include societal elements, character growth and development, history of that particular world, where this series is still lacking somewhat. But I still give it a solid 8.5 out of 10, which is great. that's a great book. Still not on the level as I would say The Wheel of Time would be, but it's a series that doesn't hold punches, like I said, and I enjoy that. With all that being said, I appreciate you tuning in. This has been another book review of Iron Gold, the 4th Red Rising book by Pierce Brown. If you haven't already, like and subscribe to this video. Let me know what you think in the comments down below or on social media if you can find me. I love you guys. Thanks for tuning in. I'm gonna head back to the bunker. Y'all have a good one. Peace.